Thank you, Donald, and good morning, everybody, and a happy Mother's Day to all of you. And I bet there are millions of you out there who've gone out yesterday or this morning and bought flowers for your mum or your grandmother, whatever it is. And, of course, most of those will have come from outside the European Union, and you will have paid nearly a 10% tariff on those flowers, because that's the rate the European Union sets. Well, more on trade a bit later on this show. But if you think about the big stories of this week, well, of course, we've got the poisoning scandal in Salisbury, and pretty shocking pictures yesterday of people wearing nuclear, biological, chemical suits in a cul-de-sac in Salisbury, in the shopping centre. And at 11 o'clock, we'll talk about that and ask whether maybe it's time that actually our Prime Minister fronted up Vladimir Putin, sat down and had a meeting with him. But that aside, the world news has been dominated this week by one man. Yes, of course, it's the Donald. Firstly, because he's actually put in place his tariffs on steel and aluminum, as they call it, in the United States of America, something no one thought he would do, and that's leading to perhaps a big standoff with the European Union, although he says that friends will be exempted, and Australia have already won that concession. But, of course, the even bigger story, the huge story, is the one about his potential meeting with Kim Jong-un. Now, bearing in mind that everybody said he was a maniac, a lunatic, he would take us to the Third World War, this is pretty remarkable progress. He hinted about it earlier on this week, and this comment that he made says a lot, not just about his policy, but about how much I think he's now actually enjoying being US president. At a dinner, before it was officially announced, he said, "I won't rule out direct talks with Kim Jong-un. As far as the risk of dealing with a madman is concerned, that's his problem, not mine." Which, I think, when you get Trump, who's started to tell jokes about himself, it does tell you that he's quite comfortable in his own skin. Well, last night, he was in Pennsylvania at a rally. There's a congressional by-election taking place there on Tuesday. Here was Trump last night in Pennsylvania talking about the possible upcoming meeting.
They're not going to send missiles up. Think of it. They're not sending missiles up. And I believe that. I believe that. I really do. I think they want to do something. I think they want to make peace. I think it's time. And I think we've shown great strength. I think that's also important.
So things are happening. And is it time for us to now recognise that Trump is a friend and an ally? And if you think, no, I still think he's dangerous and actually is a threat to world peace, well, call me on 0345 6060 973. Or perhaps, like me, you think he's achieved more than any previous US president, and just the very thought of these two men sitting down together is a good thing, potentially, for world peace, then text to 84850, and perhaps you're still on the fence. But anyway, tweet your thoughts, your comments, your questions, using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Watch us on Facebook. We're live here from a London studio. You can comment there too. Now, I'm going to go straight to South Korea, to LBC's correspondent, Alex Jensen there. Good evening, Alex.
Yes, good evening to you from Seoul.
So, very big, dramatic days. Is this potential meeting between Kim and Trump, is this seen as very effective power broking by the South Koreans?
Yeah, I mean, my immediate reaction when I spoke to you guys in the immediate aftermath of this announcement hasn't changed too much, in the sense that I think this is a dance that requires several partners. You know, the old saying, it takes two to tango. Well, it takes at least three to tango to bring Trump and Kim Jong-un together,
sure.
With South Korea playing a very important part there. But, I mean, there's no doubt that the Donald Trump factor, everyone knew when he came into office that it could be disastrous for North Korea, but it could also bring about an opportunity that had not been there before, that wouldn't be there with a president who was doing everything by the playbook. You know, straight away he was talking about having a hamburger with Kim Jong-un, for example.
Yeah.
That sort of rhetoric, it can break through, it can confuse Pyongyang in a way that they've not had to deal with. I just want to add one other thing, that you mentioned there are two stories that have been dominating, the tariffs as well, but you know that is absolutely integral to this story as well, because we've got a very confusing dynamic just on the South Korean home front alone, in that if Donald Trump is not careful, he's going to alienate this Seoul ally, which has served as a broker, but which could potentially become less than a close ally in the future, and that would certainly be harmful.
Yeah, OK. Well, that's perhaps why, Alex, he's made it so clear that there are going to be exemptions for people that he regards as friends and not as a threat. So I presume they'll find a way through this. Would it be reasonable to think that the severity of the sanctions that have been placed on North Korea are perhaps the biggest single factor that have driven Kim to accept this meeting?
If that is the case, then it's probably China that deserves the most credit, because from the U.S. perspective, under Obama, the sanctions have been allegedly crippling several times over in the past, and certainly from South Korea's perspective as well. We had a couple of conservative administrations in a row that certainly weren't keen to give North Korea much of a break. We do now have a liberal administration, which in South Korean terms means an administration that wants to cooperate with North Korea. I mean, that's not to say that it's always black and white, but that's the general political lines here. Now, as far as the sanctions are concerned, certainly they've been ramped up and ramped up again. But I think the biggest thing that Donald Trump has brought to the party is his willingness to talk of things like fire and fury, to basically ramp up the rhetoric from the U.S. perspective to match North Korea at its own game. And I think, he's confused Pyongyang, and he's made them consider him a sort of equal dialogue partner, at least, someone that they want to have a conversation with. But it certainly did rip up the playbook to a certain extent last week, because when North Korea was pushing forward with its charm offensive with South Korea during the Winter Olympics and now the Paralympics, you thought, well, they're doing this to drive a wedge between Seoul and Washington. It seemed so obvious. But now, going to the table with Donald Trump, where they must know everything's a bit unpredictable, it does suggest that maybe they were worried about that U.S. military threat of a bloody nose strategy or worse.
Yeah, well, that's certainly, Trump made that very clear in his Pennsylvania speech, that he felt that America's strength is what perhaps had led to this. And overall, as we sort of proceed towards these talks, is this being treated with great joy in Seoul and South Korea?
I think cautious optimism, even by President Moon Jae-in, who said just before the big announcement, at a time when he would have known what that secret message was for Donald Trump, the invitation for talks, he said, that this is good progress, but many obstacles still remain in place. We've seen in the past breakthroughs. North Korea has in the past opened up to International Atomic Agency inspectors, and that all went horribly wrong. I mean, we've seen this go back now more than a decade, this whole process, and we've been disappointed before. We've seen this cycle of aggression and charm offensive. My better instinct is telling me this is just going to be another one of those moments of charm from North Korea's perspective. But the fact that you got Donald Trump at the wheel on one side and Kim Jong-un on the other does make things very interesting, and I do hope I'm wrong and that this does bring about a meaningful change. I can tell you that the steady head in all this certainly will be South Korea. Moon Jae-in has had a permanent smile on his face since the opening ceremony. His face must be hurting by now, but he is so diplomatic about this, and he will bend over backwards, I'm sure, to do everything he can to make sure that South Korea is a steady middle partner. But like I said before, there's a lot of discontent about the talk of tariffs. Steel is a very important export for South Korea.
Yes. And
I know you said there may be exemptions, but it's not clear at all at this point. And we are currently under a process of renegotiating a free trade agreement. And I honestly am sensing on the street here anti-American sentiment starting to rise. And that worries me, because for expats like myself, a South Korea without U.S. protection, I mean, you just look at the history of the Korean War, I would trust Donald Trump any day, to be honest, over Xi Jinping, the man who wants to be in power forever, and that Russian administration right now.
No. Well, I think most people would agree with that. Alex Jensen, thank you very much indeed. Well, that was Alex, LBC's correspondent in South Korea, describing the prospect of these talks there being greeted with cautious optimism, but concerns over tariffs. As I've always said to you, the whole point of the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage show is, unlike all the other shows, where it's journalists talking to politicians and then mostly journalists talking to journalists, this is the place where the public gets involved. And Piers, a first-time caller from Reading, is first up. Good morning, Piers.
Good morning, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
So is it about time, Piers, we stopped talking about protests on the streets of London and calling this bloke a warmonger and wanting him banned and saying he's mentally ill? Is it about time that we recognise this guy is a friend and an ally, and a very important one?
I certainly think it is. I think a lot of the public they're just getting very flustered over all the negative news that comes out to do with him, or all the hit pieces that the mainstream media do on him. Mm-hmm. But actually, I think it's time to look at what he's been achieving in the time he's been in office. The fact that he is constantly positive about what he does, that he's actually a voice of optimism around the world, and he's actually achieving many great things for the American people, even through the rough time he's put through by the media and politicians in America.
And has your impression of him improved over the time, or were you a sort of fan of his to begin with?
Well, I have to admit, I was a fan of his to begin with, but every day that goes on, I'm more positive in my belief of him, and I'm sure that every day that goes on, I'm more sure that he'll be elected in 2020.
Yes. No, Piers, I'm with you. Thank you. And and Piers making the point there that this guy's actually doing a very good job. I put my neck on the line going over to the States in the middle of 16 and being openly very supportive of him. I'm now beginning to think that's one of the best decisions I ever made. Whenever we discuss Donald Trump, some of you say, but Nigel, you never ever criticise him. Well, I do, actually. I think the sacking of James Comey was a disaster, which led to the Mueller inquiry. But I backed this guy in the beginning because I thought he had good instincts. I backed this guy in the beginning because I loved his bullish optimism, and I think the world needs a lot more of that. On Twitter, I thought there were broadcast rules on impartiality. There are. So why don't you pluck up the courage, rather than sending me anonymous tweets, to ring 0345 6060 973 to tell me why I'm a complete deluded idiot, and that actually what Trump is doing, wanting to meet with Kim Jong-un, is actually a total disaster. Perhaps be better if they were just continually throwing abuse at each other. Not everybody, of course, thinks it's good news, and the Observer, in their editorial today, say, talks are crucial, but vain Trump blunders again. And there are suggestions in other newspapers today that actually what this does is to raise the profile and credibility of Kim Jong-un, that in some ways it allows him to be seen as an equal to the president on the world stage. All I can say to those bits of negativity is, do you know what? If these people meet, and if, just if, world peace was brought a little bit closer, I couldn't care less whether it raises Kim's credibility in North Korea. It's the big picture that matters. And I'm reminded that, just over 30 years ago, there was an American president who the very same newspapers said was a moron. Frankly, intellectually nowhere near good enough to be the American president, just a B-movie actor who made money advertising cigarettes, that he was an embarrassment to the country, a warmonger, a disaster. And you know what? After that Reykjavik summit, effectively, Ronald Reagan won the Cold War, and within a couple of years, the Berlin Wall had come down. And still, his detractors on the left never gave him 1 ounce of credit for it. Perhaps we're in the same position. We will see. Either way, whether you like him or don't like him isn't really the point. The point is, isn't it about time we started to treat him as a friend and an ally, and perhaps took him a bit more seriously than we have been in the past? And I'm flooded with your messages on Twitter. Trump, the only president to deliver on his promises, does not need financial backing, so he can do what he wants, says Kingy on Twitter. Funny. At CPAC, he said on the stage, I've kept more promises than I actually made in the campaign. So keeping promises to him is a big thing. An estimate that came out from the Heritage Foundation, big US conservative think tank, that said in year one he's actually carried out 64% of his election manifesto. As I say, you may agree with what he's doing, you may disagree with what he's doing, but he is actually doing what he told the American public he'd do. Makes a bit of a difference to this country, doesn't it? Paul is a first-time caller from Canvey Island. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. So, should we start taking Trump a bit more seriously and treating him with a modicum of more respect, Paul?
Absolutely. I mean, I was making a direct comparison to your research with the character Jim Davison last night with my wife, and he literally said, I hate you. And I said, why? So she said, the obvious spikes that have come up in the bad press recently. Well, actually, when you look at his profile as a person, he's a great father, devoted husband, charity worker, etc., etc. And she, at the end of the program, she's actually said, well, he's actually a great guy. I think you're going to find out with Trump, after his term, he's going to, as you said, with Ronald Reagan, 30 years down the line, he was he was thought to be a comedian and actor, blah blah blah, but he was a peacemaker.
Well, you know what, Paul? Jim Davison's a good friend of mine. I'm going to ring him after this show and say that Paul from Canvey Island compared him to the American president, and that will make him laugh. And I've no doubt, as a result of that, the next time you see him on stage, he'll have a gag about it too. But, Paul,
I remember seeing you on the programme, actually, last night.
Yes. Yeah, no. I mean, we do actually tend to form our opinions of people by what we read in newspapers or what we see on blogs. And sometimes that impression that we get is one that is deliberately created to be a negative one. So, Paul, did you think a year ago that Trump would do the kind of things that he's done?
Yeah, I've always been a believer in Trump. I've always been a promoter of him with my friends, and family, and workmates. And they've also laughed at me, and etc.
Oh, join the club, Paul. Join the club, Paul. I've been laughed at for years.
Same here. But no, I think he's a great guy. As you said, he's pulled up 64% of his manifesto, and I'm sure he's going to continue in that vein.
Yep.
And as far as inviting him across the UK, if we don't, we're missing a trick. We just had that prince from Saudi Arabia.
Where Paul, they cut people's hands off, they behead people,
women,
women, homosexual, but that's fine. That's fine. Yep. Trump makes a couple of brash comments, and oh my goodness me, up in arms, and a London mayor wants to ban him. Paul, I thank you for your call. Have a great Mother's Day down there in Canvey Island. Trump is deranged, I get by text. He didn't even think to tell his foreign minister. China is the real reason Rocket Man has stopped firing. Trump is the loose cannon. Well, who is it that actually got the Chinese to toughen up their sanctions on North Korea? Trump has led this from the front. He's blown the whistle on what the North Koreans are up to. Now, I know that over the last 25, 30 years, there have been several attempts at talks with the North Koreans, proposals about meetings. It was rumoured at one time that Clinton may go and meet the North Korean administration, and there is a trust issue too. Are they actually going to do as they say? Are they going to stop, developing on their road towards a nuclear weapon? There is a big trust issue, but hey, if they're prepared to talk and meet, this has to be progress. Margaret says on Facebook, Trump is a great man, achieving so much in a short time, and proud he's our ally. Well, he wants to be our ally, Margaret, but we're not letting him be our ally, and this current trade dispute perhaps gets to the heart of that debate. Ian says, you're an idiot for thinking this about Trump. Why don't you move to America? Oh, I love that. What a wonderful argument, isn't it? So if you don't like, just emigrate. I'm sure lots of people, Ian, would agree with you. If I ask people now online to club together for a ticket, it wouldn't take very long, I'm sure. Jan says, Trump is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. Saying that, I think he's slowly gaining popularity as time goes on. I feel confident he'll do another term. Jan, I think that's the point. I think there are those who've always liked him, just think he's fantastic. There are those who absolutely hate him, will never change their mind. But I do think there is a middle ground in this and other countries of people saying, do you know what? He's doing what he said, and he's making some progress. And I do think there is a change of tone. I detected that with his speech at Davos, when of all people, the boss of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, said there was more in his speech I liked than I didn't like. So I think he's beginning to win people over. Justin is calling from Romford and a first-time caller to the show. Good morning, Justin.
Morning, Nigel.
Good. So, what do you make of Trump, then?
Right, well, firstly, like I say, I'm not great on my politics. I don't really read up on it too much, because it winds me up, if I'm honest, but...
You're not alone with that, Justin. Millions of people get wound up with it, but it is somewhat of a necessary evil living in a modern Western democracy.
It is. I mean, my opinion of Trump has always been, I don't think Trump actually went to become president because he was passionate about it. I think he was the most powerful businessman in the world. Where else could he go? But I do think that he's going to succeed at this job because of that fact, because he's a businessman. A businessman, especially Trump, does not know how to fail. And that can only be good for America. Now, this thing with Kim Jong-un, how much of a coup would it be to be the first head of state in history to actually have talks with North Korea and actually become allies with North Korea?
I think allies, Justin, is perhaps stretching it a bit far because they're a communist. But at least as Churchill once said, jaw is better than war. And just even the very act of having this meeting, it's great progress, isn't it?
Definitely. I mean, I know I'm not alone in this opinion. I don't think Kim Jong-un is necessarily a dangerous man. I think he's got dangerous ideas. But I don't think he's a dangerous man, really. I don't think he's got the resources to be as dangerous as he'd like to be.
That may be true. That may be. And Justin, tell me, are you one of those people whose impression of Trump is warming as time goes on?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it if you think outside the box, right, now, as a politician, he's probably not great, but as a businessman, he's fantastic, and he does things tactically. He doesn't do anything without reason.
No, you're absolutely right. Justin, I thank you very much for your thoughts and your call. And Trump, more confident than ever, he's already registered a slogan for his 2020 re-election campaign. If you remember, last time he ran on Make America Great Again, he's already registered for 2020, Keep America Great, ! Love him or hate him, he's got a certain self-confidence, hasn't he? Well, it's not just potential talks with North Korea, it is, of course, tariffs. America to impose a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminium, or aluminum, as they call it, on that side of the pond. And the response from the European Union is, of course, one of uproar. How dare Trump behave like this? This is awful. This will damage global trade. Hang on a second. The European Union have already introduced their own tariffs on aluminium and steel. So it's okay when they do it, but it's not okay when he does it. Total rank hypocrisy. And I predict this relationship between America and the European Union is not going to improve. Look, the EU, Brussels, is pretty suspicious of America anyway. They absolutely loathe Trump, and I shall be in the debate in the Parliament on Tuesday morning in Strasbourg, where they'll no doubt be frothing at the mouth over Trump. But for the first time, somebody in the world is actually standing up to them. Because the American administration does not like the European Union either. In fact, you could argue it's that the biggest Eurosceptic shift in the last couple of years has been in Washington. Trump tweeted out a couple of days ago, the European Union, wonderful countries who treat the US very badly on trade, are complaining about tariffs on steel and aluminium. If they drop their horrific barriers and tariffs on US products going in, we will likewise drop ours. Big deficit. If not, we tax their cars, etc. Fair. You can see what Trump's doing here. This is the businessman. This is the guy looking for the deal. This is the bloke saying, hey, hang on a second. You all are making it quite tough for us to sell our products into your markets through tariff. You started this. I've retaliated. If you want to escalate it, you can, and that's fine. But actually, what he's really looking to do here is to get a better deal, and as he sees it, a fairer deal for American goods coming into the European Union. The trouble is, I don't see this being resolved quickly. And guess who's caught? Piggy in the middle. You've guessed it, the United Kingdom. Now, what's our situation in terms of trade on steel and aluminium? Well, we sell roughly £500 million worth of goods, steel and aluminium goods, to the USA every year. That doesn't make it one of our huge markets, but hey, for the engineering companies out there making these high-quality products, America is a very important, and for some of them, a crucial market. And Trump has said they want to do deals with friends. So Malcolm Turnbull, the Aussie Prime Minister, goes to meet Trump. No tariffs with Australia, and he describes Australia as a great country and as a friend. And you know something? We should, because the point of these tariffs is not to stop highly engineered products that can't be sourced anywhere else coming into the States for use in the construction industry and things like that. You know, what he's aiming at is China, basically. And China, who massively raised their production of steel at a time when they had no domestic demand, dumped it on world markets, crashed the prices, leading, by the way, folks, to the closure of steel in this country, in South Wales and the northeast. So, you know, I've never been a protectionist historically, but I felt over the last few years perhaps what China was doing was wrong and was unfair. And we should, given the fact that Trump, given the fact that Wilbur Ross, the Trade Secretary, Robert Lighthizer, the negotiator, all people that I've met and spoken to in the last few weeks, given that these people want the relationship with the UK to be as good as possible, we should be able to negotiate this exemption within 48 hours. And by the way, I'm happy to volunteer. I'll help if you want me to, Mrs. May. But of course, we can't, because we're stuck inside the European Union and we're banned from making our own trade policy. Now, you may say, well, thank goodness then we're leaving on March the 29th next year. Yeah, but the Prime Minister wants us to go into a transitional period which will go up to virtually the next general election. So we are stuck in this knot for many years to come. And I can't see a clearer example of why we need to break free, not to have a transition period, and start looking after our own interests. That's my view on trade and tariffs. Back to Korea. Gavin says, I was a fan, then I wasn't happy with his Syria strategy. I'm still not on the train, but the North Korea breakthrough is great. And Gavin reflecting a view that Trump said he'd be a non-interventionist, and actually he has intervened in Syria. Some people don't like that. On Twitter, I get Nigel Farage, you are clueless over Trump. No, I'm not. I'm not clueless. I mean, you might say I'm wrong, but I'm definitely not clueless. You know, I know this guy. I know what he's trying to do. Ben is calling from Bristol. Good morning, Ben.
Hi, Nigel.
So, are you one of those that thinks we should take Trump seriously, or do you think he's an absolute idiot?
I certainly don't think he's an absolute idiot. I've phoned in on this show a few times.
I know you have, yeah.
Talking pro-Trump, and it's good to be in such sweet agreement, Nigel, isn't it, on these matters? And I think that you've spoken a lot of sense today on Trump. This guy is just so clearly the right man for this job, and people who can't see that are just blinded by their own prejudices, their own political or personal paradigm, or political correctness, or just oversensitivity, or being the sort of people who get overly sensitive and overly easily offended. I was down the pub last night with my mates. We're talking about Trump.
Good for you.
I stood back with my arms folded, and I said, do you know how great and how free I feel to be able to just freely say, he's a good guy, he's doing a good job. He's not perfect, but he's doing a good job.
And Ben, what do the...
It's a big scoop, isn't it?
What I think it's... Listen, Ben, I think it's huge. And I frankly think those that are still criticising him have lost their reason. In fact, I kind of think, Ben, you know, if he invented a cure for some terrible disease, they'd still find a means of criticising him. But I'm curious, Ben, you know, you're down the pub in Bristol with your mates talking Trump. How does that group look at Trump now compared to, say, a year ago?
They were a little bit reticent. But they couldn't really argue with my logic because they're so, people get so consumed by political correctness, Nigel. But I'll tell you one thing, will make you laugh, just quickly off point. Do you know what one of them said?
Go on.
I do like that Jacob Rees-Mogg. Anyway, getting back on Trump. I mean, he's his genius. But his genius, there is not a single guy walking in and around in the United States of America right now who could do that job better than Trump. Now, people want to cling on to their prejudices and just keep tearing him down. Like you said with the media this week. I mean, this is what they said when they reported this incredible scoop. Do you know what they were saying? This is very risky. Risky talks with North Korea.
Yeah.
Do you know, and by the way, Nigel, I've got a few sources, that I get. I'll tell you why Kim Jong-un's comes to that table.
Well, I'll be very interested.
Trump was going to take him out. Trump was going to do a strike. I tell you, Trump is very clever. He speaks the rhetoric, then he acts a little like he might not do anything. But behind the scenes, his generals...
My button, Ben. My button's bigger than your one, is what he said, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, if you think that was going to linger on long, if this guy, Kim Jong-un, doesn't talk the right things at the table, there will be a strike on North Korea. Don't you worry about that.
All right, Ben, you may be right, you may not, but you're very certain of your views. Thank you for your call. I think, yes, of course, my button's bigger than yours was important. I get the feeling that those sanctions are basically making life intolerable in North Korea, and it doesn't matter how much power you have as a dictator, you always, always, always fear your own people. I think those sanctions have made a really big difference. Ben says to me by text, too many of our country have forgotten what the word patriot means. They still don't get Trump. Trump is not an intellectual conservative, but his policies so far have been helpful to conservatism. Do not pay attention to his tweets or the way he speaks or what the liberal media say about him. Focus on his policies and you'll like him. I think that is part of the problem, is that people find him very brash. They find him over the top. They find, I think actually many middle-class Americans find the drama of the whole thing on a daily basis somewhat draining. And on Twitter, talking of Twitter, about North Korea, he said, in the first hours after hearing that North Korea's leader wanted to meet with me and talk denuclearization and that missile launches will end, the press was startled and amazed. They couldn't believe it. But by the following morning, the news became fake. They said, so what? Who cares? North Korea, Trump says, has not conducted a missile test since November the 28th, 2017, and has promised not to do so through our meetings. I believe they will honour the commitment. So it's interesting, isn't it, that he's sort of publicly putting faith in somebody that I don't think any of us would naturally, particularly, want to trust. Some breaking news. 500 pubgoers in Salisbury, Wiltshire have been told to very carefully wash all their clothes and anything they had with them if they were out in Salisbury last week, suggesting that there are concerns about the spread of this nerve agent that was used. So it's, it really has become our problem, and we're going to talk about that from 11 o'clock, and we'll keep you up to date with any more breaking news. So, should we start to treat Trump as a friend and an ally, and wish him well in these meetings with Kim Jong-un? I certainly think we should. Janice says on Facebook, he's the UK's friend. He has shown that he doesn't use conventional methods to govern. Well, you can say that again, Janice. But he's getting things done and putting his country first. Our politicians should take a few lessons from him. And I might talk a bit about that, Janice, in the next hour as well. Richard says, I challenge any haters of Trump to ask themselves and be honest. Is there any one thing you could admit Trump has done well? No, Richard, they can't. They simply can't bring themselves to. They loathe and despise him so much. Peter is calling from Birmingham. Good morning, Peter.
Yeah, good morning, Nigel. I think this Trump hysteria that the left try and whip up is absolutely disgraceful. That country and that man is potentially one of our biggest partners, one of our biggest friends. It could do wonders for us if we allied ourselves to him. But unfortunately, we have appease and May sucking up to the EU and this, that, and the other. And I think it's wrong. If I'll give you an example, we just had this guy from Saudi Arabia come here.
Yep.
No major protests in London or anywhere else. If Cyril Ramaphosa from South Africa came here, the same thing. There would be no major protests, despite the fact that they've just passed an act of parliament in South Africa to seize white land and this, that, and the other. But Trump comes here, they all get upset.
Yeah, well, no, I'm in the Mayor of London and Jeremy Corbyn, and they all want large-scale protests, and they don't even... In fact, John Bercow basically said, the Speaker of the House of Commons, basically said he wanted him banned from coming inside the palace. I mean, I don't know who John Bercow thinks he is, but it is pretty extraordinary stuff, isn't it?
Well, John Bercow's an idiot. Pure and simple.
Well, in the interest of balance, I have to say, Peter, that not everyone thinks that.
No, but the thing is, I mean, the man is the Speaker of the Houses of Parliament. That's supposed to be an impartial
It is.
But he's not being partial. He's in some of his statements that he's made, especially in regard to Trump and others. He's proved himself not to be impartial. And, we can't have a Speaker of the House of Parliament make statements of a political nature like that. And
yet, Peter, and it goes back to what you said in your first sentence, that the anti-Trump hysteria has meant that the 800-year tradition of the Speaker of the House of Commons being neutral on such things is out of the window, because it's Trump, and it's okay, and we can all hate him. And if we say we hate him in public, it makes us better people, Peter, doesn't it?
It does, but the problem is that they don't like it because Trump is actually being successful. The American economy is moving forwards. The American people, he's bringing jobs back to the United States. He's doing what he said he would do. He said, I will put America first, and that is what he's doing. It's a pity that Theresa May, or Appeaser May as I call her, doesn't put Britain
Theresa
first.
the Appeaser. I think I might have called her unkindly once or twice in the past. Peter,
I call her the Appeaser.
No, I get the point you're making. I really do. Moving on to John in Glasgow. Good morning, John.
Nigel, given that North Korea is an international pariah state, since Friday, where does that leave a large section of the political class in this country and also a section of the community in this country who must now look so misguided that there's more likelihood right now of Donald Trump making a state visit to Pyongyang
Yes.
to London?
I hadn't thought about that, John.
So how far behind North Korea are we on the international pariah list now?
I like the way you've put that. I mean, the truth of it, John, of course, is that he has been travelling all over the world, hasn't he? I mean, just think in Europe alone. You know, he's been in Warsaw, he's been in Brussels, he's been in Paris, he's been... I forget in Germany where he went, it may have been Berlin, he's been in Rome, in Italy, and I've probably missed a few countries out. So he's been all over Europe, and he's been to Riyadh, and he's been to Beijing, and he's been, and yeah, as you say, he may even go to North Korea, and he isn't coming here. I think we're beginning to look a bit stupid, John, aren't we?
Well, indeed. I mean, we had this when up here in Scotland when the Scottish Government basically denounced Trump the minute he even was talking about running for the president. And instead of when seeing the writing on the wall when he got the nomination, giving up on it, they continued to dig the hole. And it's the same here since he became president. A certain political class in this country has led their followers down a total blind alley instead of what is in the best interest of this country, regardless of what anybody thinks of Trump. And they're still digging the hole, Nigel.
Yeah, that's the impression I get this morning, John. But I also do think, I genuinely think, there are a lot of people more in the middle on this who are, as I say, beginning to think, you know what, Trump is carrying out the manifesto upon which he was elected, and actually, he's not as bad as we thought he was going to be.
Absolutely. I mean, there seems to be this inability to separate out this personal enmity for the man with what is in the interest of this country. There are things done in the interest of this country with all kinds of pariahs or pariahs.
Of course.
All the time.
Including Saudi Arabia.
Well, there's the Saudi Arabia situation, we've got obviously the Russian situation, and there's all sorts of things that government ministers have to swallow their pride on, but it seems that nobody in the Labour Party or in many other sections in the political class, it's now a matter of pride that they have to stick to the principles on Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, John, I really am genuinely hoping for a change of heart from those very senior leading Labour figures. And I think in the national interest, that is exactly what they should do. On Twitter, I get publicly attacking Sadiq Khan and Theresa May and retweeting racist posts from British far-right group, the leaders of which have since been convicted. No, Trump is too unpredictable to be a friend or ally to anybody in the UK, not even to you, says Malcolm. Well, look, he and Sadiq Khan have had this war of words, but perhaps it's not very surprising, is it really, when the Mayor of London wants the bloke banned from coming to our city? And as for retweeting this Britain First stuff, well, as I've explained on this show many, many times before, 43 million people follow Trump on Twitter, and he follows 43, one of whom is Ann Coulter, a conservative American commentator. She tweeted out their videos, he retweeted it, and when Piers Morgan interviewed him, as he said, he'd never even heard of who Britain First were. The left, but anyway, I do understand, Malcolm, a lot of people don't like him, and your point about unpredictability is certainly true. See, I think this announcement about the potential meeting with Kim Jong-un, it even caught the White House, the West Wing, and many of his own cabinet by total surprise. So he is unpredictable. He is unconventional. He does things differently, but at the moment, he's not doing them badly. That's the point I'm making. I get by text, the left can't stand Trump because he is destroying their message that the only way to solve the world's problems is full socialism. The silent majority support Trump, and this will be seen when he arrives. Well, when is he going to arrive? We just don't quite know the answer to that. Look, I think in summation of this debate, I do understand why people have reservations about this man. I do understand that he is a little bit too out there for many, many people. He's brash. He's a New Yorker. New Yorkers are very, very like that, and there are many in America that find him tough to deal with, that find, as I said earlier, the drama of the whole thing literally exhausting on a daily basis, just watching the news. I'm going to go to Matt in Hounslow. Matt, is he doing the right thing, going to meet Kim?
Well, who knows what he's, actually doing the right thing. But I think going to your comment about, needing to be tough and using strong words like, the button and my button's bigger than yours. I think it's just, first off, it's not a new tactic. This is a tactic that's been tried for years, for decades, unsuccessfully. Go back to Vietnam. This is the madman theory that Nixon tried. And what did it do? It made he started bombing Laos, Cambodia, descended into civil war. He tried to get out, as a political victory before the elections, and it was a disaster. So thinking that acting tough and playing a hard game with the North Korean leader is going to, as a new tactic. Actually, for the last 20 years, we've been trying that. We decided to label North Korea, along with Iran and Iraq, in the axis of evil.
But at least, Matt, whatever the reasoning, and you're quite right, there have been many attempts before to do all sorts of things with North Korea, but hey, isn't a face-to-face meeting a good thing?
Yeah, but
yes or no?
Do you really trust Trump's? I think it could be either just a spectacle, which it probably will be.
Yeah,
I think it's all just going to be a spectacle distraction, so that they can run their own public, crazy policies.
Well, let's hope, Matt, that it's a bit more than that. Let's hope it's more than political cynicism. Let's hope they really mean it. Thank you. Well, moving on. The Sunday papers today suggesting that Russian oligarchs and their associates have given £820,000 to the Tory party since Mrs May became PM. And what with the ongoing investigation into the poisoning of a former Russian spy, is it time that Mrs May now demanded a meeting with Mr Putin? And if you think, yes, she should confront him and find the truth, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Or perhaps you think, no, we'll give him a completely wide berth, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you think she should hand back the Russian donor money, in which case tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. Well, really shocking pictures from Salisbury in the last 48 hours, not just the town centre, the market square, but also the little cul-de-sac in which the former Russian spy lived. And to see people wearing NBC kit, nuclear, biological, chemical kit, really is very, very shocking indeed. And this morning's breaking news that up to 500 Salisbury pub goers and diners have been told to wash possessions as a precaution after nerve agent traces were found. And there are 5 possible locations across Salisbury that have been identified as the possible source of this nerve agent. So no one quite knows where all this is going. Sleepy little city, not much bigger than a market town, frankly, in southern Wiltshire, and it is a huge, huge shock to everybody. And I suppose in some ways this does come back to leadership. You know, I've always been one that said we should try to talk to the Russians. We should try to improve our relationship, if that is possible. And we have to be fair and say that at the moment we don't have any proof as to what the source of this was, whether it was a Russian state actor. But, you know, there's a very long list of people who are seen as either being traitors to Russia or people who've crossed Vladimir Putin, who are no longer around. Boris Berezovsky, found apparently hanged in his bathroom in 2013. A series of British businessmen, Scott Young, Paul Castle, Robbie Curtis. There's a long, long list here. And, of course, the Litvinenko poisoning, which we saw played out so publicly on our screens 10 years ago, which we had pretty conclusive proof was linked to Russian state actors. So we can't ignore this. It's happening in our backyard. And there are 500 people this morning in Salisbury going to be actually rather worried about what their situation is. So it does come back to leadership. Now, it's very interesting that at the time when some of us were talking about perhaps trying to talk to Russia, Theresa May was taking very much the opposite view. You know, she said when she became Prime Minister that she would sup with a long spoon with the Russians and that it would not be business as usual with Moscow. She promised to distance her party from the Russian donors. And yet, the front page today of the Sunday Times, you know, big article there saying that declared donations worth over £825,000 have come from Russian link supporters since she became Prime Minister in July 2016. So what with that and the ongoing investigation, is it time that Mrs. May perhaps picked up an idea from Donald Trump? And I've talked before about her lack of decisive leadership, but I was very struck by Peter Oborne yesterday in the Mail. Headline, "It's time Mrs. May took a leaf out of Trump's book." And what he was really talking about here was leadership in terms of how we deal with the negotiations with Brussels. But actually, I'm going to take the Oborne theme on a little bit and say, I think now what she should do is to demand a meeting with Putin and to go and ask for some explanations. Is it perhaps now time, given the magnitude of what is happening in Salisbury, is it time she confronted him over this issue? Call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think that's wrong. We should just keep as far away from Putin as we possibly can, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe you think that actually the most positive thing she could do is to hand back the Russian donor money. And if you think that, then tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch us on Facebook. We're live from London next. Now, when I talked about this on Thursday, a lot of you ringing in felt this wasn't the Russians, that it was simply too obvious, and that perhaps the whole thing was designed to set them up. And I have to say, having thought about this, there's just too much evidence, isn't there? And don't forget that Skripal, this guy, when he was an agent, was handing information to the British. And that's why they put him in prison in Russia, and then he was part of a spy exchange swap for Anna Chapman. And, you know, I've no doubt that the Russian leadership, and probably majority of Russian people, do not view traitors particularly kindly. So in terms of Putin's standing in his own country, if your average Russian voter thought that Putin had him bumped off, that might actually do his popularity more good than harm. But what we can't have we can't have, and I was going to say the streets of London, because that's where you expect this stuff if it's going to happen. We can't expect the streets of anywhere in our country. We can't stand idly by and allow this sort of thing to happen. The Russians could have killed the spy when they caught him. Looks to me it could be done by someone else, says Kevin from Warrington. Well, Kevin, they could have killed him when they caught him, but they didn't. He went through a judicial process. If this is the Russians doing it, it's them saying, isn't it? You can run, but you can't hide. In the end, we are going to catch up with you. I have another one here. I have my doubts that Russia is to blame. It's interesting. A lot of people are very, very doubtful that Russia is to blame. I don't know the answer to it, but it does seem to me to be very likely, given the events that we've seen before. Now, whether the real question is, was this somebody who was sanctioned by the Russian government to do what he or she did? And none of us know the answer to that. Nigel is calling from Winchmore Hill. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So
Good name.
Well, very absolutely. I'm sorry that you're stuck with it. I just think here's a moment. I mean, frankly, we've heard nothing from Mrs. May, have we, since the incidents in Salisbury? We did hear her saying she wouldn't take Russian money for the party, and they have. Isn't this a moment for her to show true leadership and to say to Putin, right, we've got to sit down and talk about this?
Well, absolutely. I mean, let's just face it, leading up to this, we've had the most immense amount of propaganda, anti-Russian propaganda. There has been no evidence at all produced against Putin, precisely, even in the Litvinenko case. It was just probably. And the truth is that what we need is a new narrative in the world to talk about, the existence of Russia and it to be part of a global environment that's ruled under international law. And I think the Russians are arguing for that themselves.
OK, so you're another one, Nigel, that thinks that, maybe this is not as obvious as it looks at first glance.
Well, I have several concerns. The first being that the source of the nerve agent just happens to be manufactured 6 miles away in Porton Down. That seems like too much of a coincidence for my liking. And also, what I don't like is the reaction.
But Porton Down, Nigel, Porton Down doesn't commercially sell things on the market, does it?
No, I mean, obviously that it might have been leaked from there, or who knows. I just think that should form part of the investigation. I make no assumptions at this point. I just say that it's very coincidental. But my concern is the reaction that we've had so far, which is to increase NATO's presence in Eastern Europe, which seems to me to lead to a motive why you would attack this man or kill this man, because Russia would be crazy to have done this themselves, right?
Everyone says Russia would have been crazy to do this themselves, and I completely understand that argument, but there's a long list of coincidences here, Nigel, aren't they, going back many, many years. Basically, if you've been a Russian spy that's given away state secrets and you're living in the West, your life's in danger, isn't it?
Well, and how many British spies have we terminated over the years for treasonous acts?
Well, actually, the Cambridge spies went off and lived their lives untouched by us until they died.
Mm. Well, look, as I said, all you need is some evidence, right? If you provide some evidence, then, and that's my concern, is that at what point are people guilty until proven innocent? Provide slam dunk evidence, then we would not be speculating, we would not be having these conversations.
Well, either way, Nigel, whether my suspicions are right or whether your suspicions are right, the atmosphere of distrust between us and Russia is almost now back to Cold War levels.
Well, and I feel that is totally unacceptable. Remember, the Russians fought in both the First World War and the Second World War. They lost 20 million, so more than the Allies put together, right? And our reaction to them is disgraceful, the way that we've treated them in terms of that relationship.
So either way, Nigel, return to my original point, would this be a good moment for Theresa May to say, let's have a summit, let's have a meeting, let's talk about this?
Absolutely, it's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer. Gotcha. Nigel says it's a no-brainer. Sleepy City Salisbury suddenly is the centre, not just of attention in this country, but right across the world. People are seeing what is going on, and there's been a new twist and development this morning. I'm going to go to the Market Square in Salisbury now and talk to Adele Robinson, Sky News' correspondent, who's there. Good morning, Adele.
Good morning.
Good morning. So what's the new development?
Well, the Chief Medical Officer, Dame Sally Davies, has been speaking within the last hour, and she's effectively issued some advice that is basically that anyone who attended the Mill Pub or Zizi's restaurant here in Salisbury last Sunday should be washing their clothes. That's the sort of top line of it. She has reiterated that this should affect less than 500 people, that it's actually between the hours of 1:30 p.m. last Sunday and evening closing on Monday. Anyone who was in these two locations should be taking action. She stressed, though, that this is a precautionary measure, that the risk to public safety is low, that she's confident that customers and staff members, none have been harmed. She said that trace levels of a nerve agent have been discovered in Zizi's and the Mill Pub on surfaces, and obviously trace means low level. It's taken a while for these scientific tests to come back because they're scientific tests, and she has also emphasised that nobody's health has been harmed while they've had to wait, effectively.
No, and tell me, what's it like? I mean, I know it's Sunday morning and not a particularly busy day in Salisbury because I know the place quite well, but I mean, just sort of talking to residents, are people just bewildered by this?
Yeah, bewildered, fascinated, and a little alarmed, if I'm honest, because you'll have seen that on the television there have been scenes of people who are masked, suited, booted, wearing hazmat suits. We've got specialists from the Army, the RAF and the Royal Marines who have been on the streets of Salisbury offering their specialist expertise in chemical warfare, and they've been taking away, isolating objects and vehicles such as ambulances and flowers from a grave site for decontamination, and also because as part of the investigation they'll be trying to build up a footprint of where exactly this nerve agent or traces of it are to be found, and potentially through this footprint they will be able to trace back the origin.
Yes, so as to whether it came through their front door at home or was administered somehow in public.
Exactly, yeah, that's exactly what they will be trying to establish. A little bit more information as well from Dame Sally Davies, the Chief Medical Officer. She's asked, I mean, it's extraordinary, really. She's saying that people should be washing their clothing that they haven't already if they've been in Zizi's and the Mill Pub. Any items that can't be washed, so, for example, clothes that need to be dry cleaned, they should be double bagged in plastic until further information is available. She's also asking people to wipe personal items such as phones and handbags and other electronic items, even baby items, and dispose of them in plastic bags.
It's pretty alarming stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, when you're told to, wash all of your jewellery and your glasses with warm water and detergent just because you went to the pub or you went to a restaurant, of course that's going to be alarming. People, I spoke to a hairdresser yesterday where Mr. Skripal used to get his hair cut on a regular basis. And she said that they were scared. But at the same time, these sort of things don't happen in, as it's locally known as Salisbury.
Salisbury, I know. And finally, Adele, do we have any update on the medical condition of the Skripals?
Only that they're still in a critical but stable condition, and that's continuing. And also, obviously, the Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey, he's in a serious but stable condition, and as you know, he has already issued a statement last night, speaking from his hospital bed, saying that he was thanking the public effectively for their support, and also saying that he didn't see himself as a hero, and that he was just doing his job.
Just doing his job, I saw that, yeah. Very modest, and in absolutely the best traditions of all the emergency services in our country. Adele Robinson from Sky News from Salisbury, thank you very much indeed. Well, have to say, even though Dame Sally Davies may have tried to play down concerns over this, I think to be told that, wash clothes, wash your jewellery, bag up clothes, double bag clothes. I would have thought there's a lot of people in Salisbury this morning who are perhaps getting more concerned as time passes rather than less so. So, is it time for Theresa May to take a leaf out of Donald Trump's book? After all, he's going to go and meet the North Korean leader. Is it time she went and met Putin and we had this out in public? Hassan from Slough is on the line. Good morning.
Hi, morning, Nigel. Hi, we spoke last year about Brexit, but very interesting topic, this one.
Right. So what do you think? What should the response of the government be, Hassan, to this? I mean, we haven't got conclusive proof yet, but they need to do something, don't they?
Yeah, no, they do, I agree. It's a difficult one, actually. I think it should be business as usual, but certainly Theresa May should protest...
Hassan, are you speaking clearly into the mouthpiece?
I am speaking very clearly, yes. Is there a crackling sound here?
I'll tell you what we'll do. I'm going to drop you and get you back in a moment. I'm going to go to Charles in Birmingham. Charles, good morning.
Good morning.
So we don't know that it's the Russians, but many of us suspect that it is. I suppose we could freeze a few bank accounts, we could kick out a few diplomats, we might even talk about not going to the World Cup, but that would enrage, I think, millions of football supporters. But isn't it time for leadership, Charles?
It is, but if we play the World Cup, every country's got to follow us, otherwise it will make no difference. That is the problem you have. Unless the countries follow us and help us, if it's the Russians, if it's Putin, it's going to make no difference to Russia whatsoever, at all. Because we play the World Cup, somebody else, okay, we can win it. But
yes. Mind you, Charles, the chances of England winning the World Cup are pretty limited, aren't they?
That's right. That's correct. But the other thing is as well, I mean, whoever administered this stuff to these people is either lying in the house dead or walking round, because they've got to be looking for a third person, surely, as well. I mean, how was this administered?
Well, I just haven't got a clue how that would operate. I mean, it is possible, Charles, I suppose, that this agent was inside a parcel or a package that was opened. Charles, I don't know, and from the sounds of it, no one at the moment knows exactly how this happened. And the other problem, Charles, is, I mean, firstly, it's tough to know exactly what to do, but I do think maybe, having a meeting, having this out in public might be a good thing, but it's also very tough to know whether we'll ever get proof, because even if it turned out that this was done by somebody who's a Russian agent, will we ever get any evidence that it was sanctioned by the Russian government? I mean, lots of the callers, Charles, into this show over the last few days and other shows on LBC, a lot of them say the Russians would have been mad to do this.
That's right, but also, if it was the Russians, obviously we've got to prove it was them. But how long is this going to take? Is it going to take weeks, months, years? When will the intelligence come out and definitely say to us? Well,
here's the other.
The lab in Russia.
Charles, Charles, here's the problem. We may never know the absolute truth.
But they were, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's been on the news that they will be able to identify which lab this come from and where it come from. So if they can do that, we know exactly where it come from.
Well, let's hope they can, Charles. And if they identify it to a lab in Russia, that'll get us a lot closer. But we still may well get denials from the Russian government. Charles, I think it must have been the Russians in some way, because otherwise it's just too big a string of coincidences that we've seen over the last few years. I thank you, Charles. Back to Hassan and a better phone line, I hope.
Yes, we had a few rehearsals with the producer.
That's a lot better. Right, the floor is yours. You're back on LBC a year on. Hassan, tell us what you think.
Thank you, Nigel. Yes, so you asked the question, what should Theresa May do? And I think it should be business as usual. The suspicion is towards Russia, obviously, and if there is actually growing evidence, with some probability it was Russia, then, of course, there should be stronger action here. Now, the main enemies today are Muslim terrorism and far-right extremism. So what this issue has highlighted, we can't still ignore that there is a residual element of the Cold War at play here. Now, there were some criticisms when Amber Rudd actually sent some military personnel, 160 of them, in Salisbury. Yeah. I think she did the right thing, because it's a show of force, of strength, from a PR perspective to Russia, if they did do it. And you may remember the death of Gareth Williams. He was an MI6 agent. And he was found murdered in Pimlico in a suitcase.
Very strange.
And he was investigating money laundering in Moscow. So, with these examples in mind and Litvinenko, I think what it highlights is some weakness within our own security, and that we should really be questioning that and strengthening that, because whilst MI5 and MI6 are doing sterling jobs trying to combat terrorism, obviously they can't predict every single act of terrorism. But in the case of Litvinenko, Gareth Williams, and Skripal, they are sitting targets. So the security should have been tightened even more.
Yeah, well, but there's a limit, is there not, Hassan? I mean, you can't provide everyone with security, can you? And somebody who came to this country, 6-7 years ago, as part of a spy swap. If you said to the taxpayer that he and his family were going to be given 24/7 security, a lot of people would be very upset with that, wouldn't they?
They would, but given the the examples of these three deaths, they were actually sitting targets. So whilst we're not saying 24/7, at least review the security and see what different could be done.
Okay.
If not 24/7.
Okay, Hassana, thank you. And I get from Andrew. Some say you are friendly with President Putin. Perhaps Prime Minister May should dispatch you to Moscow to talk to him about Salisbury. Can I say, for the 100th time on this show, I've never been to Russia. I've never met President Putin. I haven't run memory sticks between him and Trump and Julian Assange. It's just not true, which is a pity, because it would be a great story. Well, events in Salisbury today, with up to 500 pubgoers and diners being told to wash their possessions as a precaution after nerve agent traces are found, says far from being an attempted contract killing, this is now turning into an act of terrorism. Difficult to see it any other way. Some would say that if it turns out to be the Russians killing one of their own in our country, it's not that far away from being an act of war. Either way, this is now becoming a very, very serious situation. And I think we picked up earlier from the Sky reporter down in Salisbury, from Adele, I think actually, I'm not surprised that people in Salisbury are becoming more, not less concerned with this story as every day goes by. But before I come back to that, just a little bit of Brexit, if you'll allow me. I've been really good. Hour and 36 minutes. It's been a Brexit-free zone. I must throw something in. Interesting piece of polling in the Sunday Telegraph. Poll conducted, commissioned by them, asking a very simple question. Do you agree that the European Union is trying to bully the UK in the Brexit negotiations? 67% agree, only 17% disagree, with the rest undecided. So, a really, really big majority of people who feel that actually Juncker and Barnier and that awful Verhofstadt are just trying to bully Britain. And I think, whether it's on the Brexit issue, or whether it's on actually this issue confronting Putin, we need the British Prime Minister to be a bit more like Trump and to stand up and say, right, let's have face-to-face meetings. And I'm going to be in the Parliament in Strasbourg on Tuesday morning, where there's a big debate, and it's going to be about the big European summit taking place, where they'll talk about the transition period, the trade deal, etc. But there'll also be a lot of President Trump talks on Tuesday morning as well. And I promise you, I will not shy away from confronting the bullies of Brussels. Absolutely not. So, is it time for Mrs May to show a bit more leadership over this? Maybe even to hand the money back that the Tory party has taken from Russian sources? And some suggesting maybe we shouldn't send the football team to the World Cup, but that doesn't get, I feel, very much support at all. I'm going to go to Mike in York. Mike, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel, and happy Mother's Day to everybody listening.
Absolutely, yeah. So, Mike, tell me, what do you think the guy... I mean, we haven't got any proof, but we do have a lot of history, don't we?
We do. But let's remind everybody what we pay an enormous amount of money for, NATO.
Yes.
All for one and one for all. So now's the time to prove it, Instead of May going to see Putin, NATO delegates go to see Putin.
Wouldn't that be a somewhat premature act if we had absolutely no proof that it was a Russian actor that did it? And when I said a few minutes ago it's almost tantamount to an act of war, I didn't say it was quite an act of war in itself, did I?
No, but at the same time, if Russia hadn't done it, someone's got hold of this lethal stuff. We're lucky that only, say, 500 people in Salisbury. What happens if they had a plane and they spread it over the country?
Listen, I completely understand what you're saying, which is why, well, I mean, do you think the Russian government sanctioned this? Is that your feeling?
I don't know, but I think we should adopt the policy of reason to urge, i.e. extreme caution. And the way to get the Russians on side is simply say, this is a very serious matter. If you're not involved, we want your help. The World Cup's coming up. So all our NATO countries, none of them play football in Russia. They all reschedule them elsewhere. They've got fantastic stadiums, so we don't need to bother about that.
Well, I tell you what, Mike, I know a country that's got some really great stadiums all over it, where they had a bid to get the World Cup, which was led by Prince William and David Beckham, and we haven't had the World Cup for over 50 years. We could do it, couldn't we?
We could. I mean, and I think the other thing is, until we know for definite, then what action can we take? But our troops are already in Estonia and wherever, helping other NATO countries.
Yes. Mike, I really worry that you're ramping this up. I mean, I'm suggesting that the Prime Minister, goes to see Putin and says, look, there are major problems here. We've got to talk about this. You would really be ratcheting this up almost as far as you could go, wouldn't you?
Well, we're just taking a leaf out of Donald Trump's book. I mean, what does Putin understand? Strength, nothing else.
All right. No, well, it's a compelling argument, but I don't think we've quite yet reached the NATO stage. Mike from York, I thank you. Well, in a way he's right, isn't he? Trump gets tough with North Korea and talks are happening, but I think bringing NATO in at this moment would be too early. On Twitter I get, hard to prove Russia killed, well, he's not dead yet, but killed the double agent. Russian leaders run a rogue-style nation, and this is the problem. It's very, very hard to prove. I also get on Twitter, utter rubbish, of course. It's the Russians and not anyone else. It's referring to those that have been saying maybe it wasn't Russia. I mean, who else has access to a nerve agent? It's not as though anyone can just walk into a supermarket, for instance, and buy it off the shelf, says Dougie in Lewisham. Good morning, Nigel, I get by text. This weapon in Salisbury stands alongside a dirty bomb. It's now time for Theresa May to ask a few questions. No dilly-dallying. The arrogant little man Putin needs to be brought to book, says Frank in Whitehaven. Well, there's some really tough talk in this hour, I have to say, including, sending NATO. He wants to send NATO off to meet Putin. I think it's a bit early for that. Oh, one of the joys of doing this show is I feel so moderate, but... Let's go to John in Hendon. John, good morning.
Hi. Well, funny enough, I was going to say the same thing about NATO.
Go on.
We've also got, we've got Litvinenko, who you obviously know because his widow was associated with UKIP.
She was, that's right, yes.
Yeah. We're more or less 100% certain of that, and so NATO could get involved on that side of it.
But NATO, John, is about NATO is about a country being militarily attacked. And whilst I do accept, John, there is an escalation of this morning with 500 very worried people in Salisbury. It's not quite the same as an act of war, is it?
It is, because NATO have said that they get involved in terrorism, and they stood up when we got bombed in Manchester and made a bit of noise about that. Also, NATO want to show their relevance after Donald Trump told them that they were totally irrelevant, so they may well be interested. The other thing I wanted to say to you, people keep ringing up saying, well, how do we know it's Russia?
Yep.
Sherlock Holmes, through Arthur Conan Doyle, who was way ahead of his time in police forensics and so on. In fact, the police used him as a sort of textbook.
Yes.
He said, and I quote, "Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth." And if you think about that, there's only about 3 countries that could be doing this. And once you eliminate them, the only one that's left is Russia.
And who are the 3, John?
Well, ourselves,
yeah,
America,
yeah,
Russia, and possibly, I think, France,
Okay.
I think this is what I've heard on LBC. I don't know for sure.
Must be true then, mustn't it?
Yeah.
No, okay.
There's only very few countries, and you have to think, well, what? And then people say, well, they could have killed him while he was in prison, which is true. But on the other hand, they've used him to get one of their own agents back.
Absolutely.
So therefore, he was worth keeping alive for that. And now we don't know what reasons. There may be something going on in recent times that make him a target. But he obviously has been targeted. There's no question about that.
No, of course. Of course he's been targeted. And of that there's no doubt. And John, you're clearly an Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes fan, are you?
And a UKIP fan.
And a UKIP fan. And which actor, in your view, has played the best Sherlock? Is it the old black and white ones of Basil Rathbone, or do we come right up to date with Benedict?
Probably Basil Rathbone, yeah. I don't like the modern versions where they, Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
I don't like that at all. But
either way, whether it's Benedict Cumberbatch or whether it's Basil Rathbone, your quote was a rather useful and rather brilliant one, and I thank you for it. Well, we don't know whether it's the Russians that planted this nerve agent in Salisbury. We don't even know whether it was planted in ZZ's or whether it was in the Mill pub or whether it was a parcel that went to the Skripal's home. There's an awful lot we don't know. We do know that today, up to 500 pub and restaurant goers from Salisbury have been told to wash all of their possessions as a precaution after traces of nerve agent have been found in both of those locations. And all of this in sleepy Salisbury, or Smallsbury, as it's jokingly referred to. So what's to be done? Should the Prime Minister take a bit of decisive action and demand a meeting with Putin and try and thrash this out? Well, I've been somewhat outflanked in the last 15 minutes by people saying that NATO should get involved. And there was a very interesting point on that NATO is looking for a new role, and countering terrorism is one of them. But I do think the thought of sending off NATO officials to Moscow would be a little premature at this stage, unless I'm just going, I don't know, soft perhaps, in my old age. So I'm just not sure. But I do think it's very difficult for the government to know exactly what to do. We may never get proof of who actually did this. So it's not easy. But I do think the idea that a Prime Minister stands up and says, right, let's have a meeting with the Russians. There's too many coincidences here. There's been too much of this going on the streets of London and now in Wiltshire too. Vicky is calling from Brighton. Good morning, Vicky.
Hello, good morning, Nigel. The point I'd like to make is very simple, I think, that if it's much quicker to identify the laboratory that this stuff was made in, I mean, this is what we're led to believe.
Yes.
And it was identified as a Russian laboratory. And if you turn it round the other way, what would Russia do if this had happened to them in their country and a British laboratory had been identified? The court.
Well, they would be going to they'd probably be going to the UN Security Council and raising merry hell, I'd have thought, Vicky.
Well, of course. And the first thing they'd do is shoot out the British ambassador, close down the embassy and whatever. So, I think the laboratory is the absolute key to this, as to where this laboratory is. And I say, if the authorities are correct, and this can be identified as to which country it came from, because frankly, it's a bit like Porton Down. There's no way that the government and, MI5 and all the rest of it are not totally controlling, as they should do, Porton Down in this country.
Yeah, well, it's a coincidence, Vicky, or is it, that Porton Down, which is the sort of HQ in this country of all the nuclear, biological and chemical testing of agents and things, happens to be, about 3 to 4 miles from the centre of Salisbury?
Well, yes. I don't know. Could something have been stolen or whatever?
Well, I don't know, but I just sort of, pose it. I mean, where else could this stuff come from?
Well, it's got to come from a laboratory somewhere in the world that it has the capability of making it. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
So one really doesn't know.
If Vicky, go on, yeah. please do.
Well, it is slightly changing the subject, but maybe it's not meant to be light or frivolous. It's genuine. One comment about Donald Trump. I had open mind about Donald Trump. I make my own opinion, but I also like to listen to people who actually know him. And the two people that I watch and listen to regularly are yourself and Piers Morgan. And actually, I like both of you. So if you think he's all right, then that impresses me.
Very good, Vicky. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you for your call. And, of course, Piers and I, who do come from different sides of the political spectrum. David is calling from Virginia Water. David, did the Russians do it?
There's no proof. Firstly, I'm such a great fan of yours, Nigel, you wouldn't believe it. There's no proof whatsoever that the Russians were involved.
There is no proof.
A lot of countries would love this to be blamed on the Russians. But one more point I must make. It's the North Korean leader now wants to meet Donald Trump.
Yep.
And I'll tell you why. It's because the two previous presidents, Bush and Obama, they've done nothing about all these build-up of missiles. But this North Korean leader...
No, David. That was the last hour. I get the point you're making. I get the point you're making. Now, let's have a little think about this, right? Who would want to frame the Russians in this way? In whose interest would it be to do this?
And I'm pretty sure every country in the world goes round and kills these traitors. At the end of the day, this man who hasn't died yet, I hope he doesn't, and his daughter, they was traitors. And I'm pretty sure it happens all over the world. And Russia's not that stupid. I don't think that. And Russia's a very, very powerful country. And all this about banning football, you don't think Russia could worries about that, do you?
Oh, yeah, no, I think the World Cup is a big deal for Russia. I genuinely do. So, it's a huge event that is taking place in their country. I think in terms of prestige, I think in terms of Putin's place in the world. No, David, I think the World Cup's a big deal.
But what I'm trying to explain... There's no proof. It's all assumption, isn't it? It's all they're going to do this. They're going to do
Okay, but David, I understand that point, and there is no proof. But we do see a pattern, don't we?
Yes, of course we do. But then again, what are we going to do about it? Because you're talking about a very powerful man in a very powerful country. What are we going to do?
David, I suspect the answer to that is not very much, actually. I suspect you're right, David. I thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for talking to me, Nigel.
No, not one bit. Have a great Sunday. Thank you.
Bye.
Rob says on Facebook, was he targeted because he was a Russian spy? Or has he been up to his old tricks? Here's an idea. Be safe and don't be a Russian spy. Well, I think we can extend that, Rob, into don't make an enemy of Vladimir Putin. Otherwise, your chances of coming to a deeply unpleasant end appear to be rather higher than it is for the rest of the population. Let's go to South Woodford and to David. David, hello, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. What the Russians may have done here by this poisoning is no different from what other intelligence agencies do. The Americans are killing people in other sovereign countries using drones, people they don't like. A few years ago, the Israeli Secret Service used forged British passports to kill someone in the Middle East.
David, it's a rotten line. I'm going to let you go and try and get you back. David was making the point there that, we use drones to kill people in other countries. The Americans have done it. And, of course, the British were very happy for people like Jihadi John to be taken out by drone strikes. But that was happening inside countries that were already warring countries. It wasn't happening in a sleepy market city called Salisbury in Wiltshire. Tony in Epsom is going to be my last caller of the morning, I think. Hello, Tony.
Hello, Tony. Hello, Nigel. Nice to speak to you, Nigel.
Thank you. So what? Well, we are welcome to the show. And what do you think, Tony?
Well, I think obviously all week the narrative has been just purely Russia is the only ones in the frame. I think we need to add to that narrative with who else it could be, and not just from callers, but from people like yourselves who prepare for these shows. Coming out, in the media, I've not heard any. We've not been taught anything on who else it could be, and what reasons other intelligence services or shadow governments what their reasons for doing it might be. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed.
Tony, I've heard lots of people say there's no proof. Don't jump to conclusions. I understand that. I've heard lots of people say, but this could well be someone trying to frame the Russians because the Russians wouldn't be this stupid. But nobody, Tony, has given me any really valid argument as to in whose interest would it really be to do this.
I think, do you know what I find coincidental also? Is that this sort of happened in the same week that Donald Trump has announced he's going to see the North Korean leader. So that kind of, it looks like that's dying down, and then this kind of flares up. So it's like reading between the lines. Obviously, Donald Trump didn't announce to the media first that this was happening. This has obviously been planned for quite a while, and then all of a sudden this happens. So I don't really trust everything I see, and I do read between the lines. I think that if you want to say, well, why would someone do it, and why would someone want sort of us to drag us in a war with Russia? Well, Russia's getting in the way in the Middle East, and the seven-nation plan that came out after 9/11. He's interfering with that. So
Could be.
He'll have a lot of enemies with a lot of resources.
but this is a pretty radical thing to do. Tony, I thank you. I want to tell you about my brand new podcast called Farage Against the Machine. I've spent 20 years taking on the establishment, and that's what this podcast is all about. My first episode went out live on Friday, and I take you backstage at the CPAC conference where I interview the chair of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp, about the conference, his relationship with Trump, and maybe CPAC coming to the UK. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show.